We are doing Daf Yomi, Daf Chavtet Aleph. We're going to start on Chavchet Amud Bet 28, second page. Make sure the microphone is on here. And the microphone is on. Good. We're doing it from the Koren Talmud Bavli. Best Gemara on the market. Based on the work of Rabbi Adon Steinsaltz, I'm your host, Bezalel Edwards. Mishnah on page 28b, Chavchet Amud Bet. Mishnah says, Rabbi Gamliel Omer, B'kol yom v'yom mitpalel adam shmona esrei. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, me'en shmona esrei. The Mishnah cites a dispute with regards to the obligation to recite the Amida prayer, also known as the Shmona Esrei, the prayer of 18 blessings, or simply as Tefillah, prayer. Rabbi Gamliel says each and every day a person recites the prayer of 18 blessings. Rabbi Yoshua says a short prayer is sufficient, and one only recites an abridged version of the prayer of 18 benedictions. Me'en Shmona Esrei. Rabbi Akiva Omer, im shkurat tfiloto b'fiv, mitpalel Shmona Esrei. V'im lav me'en Shmona Esrei. Rabbi Akiva says if his prayer is fluent, he says the entire 18 blessings, and if his prayer is not fluent, he recites the abridged version of the 18 blessings. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, ha'osei tfiloto keva, ein tfiloto tachnunim. Rabbi Eliezer says one whose prayer is fixed, his prayer is not supplication and is flawed. The Gemara will clarify the halachic implications of this flaw. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, ha'olech b'makom sakana mitpalel tefillah ksara. Rabbi Yoshua says if you're in a dangerous place, you pray a short prayer. V'omer, hosha Hashem et amcha et she'erit Yisrael b'kol parashat ha'abur yiyu tzarcheihem lefanecha. B'kol parashat ha'ibur yiyu tzarcheihem lefanecha. Baruch ata Hashem shomei tefillah. Rabbi Yeshua says, when you're walking in a place of danger, you say a short prayer, you say, redeem, Lord, your people, the remnant of Israel. At every transition, Parashat Ibor means a transition, meaning the meaning of which will be discussed in the Gemara. May their needs be before you. Blessed are you, Lord, who listens to prayer. Haya rochev al chamor yered v'palel. If someone's riding on a donkey, he gets off and he prays. Im enu yechol ered yachazor et panav. If a person is riding a donkey, he should dismount and pray calmly. If he's unable to get off the donkey, he should turn his face towards the direction of the temple. If he is unable, if he can't turn his head to face the direction of the temple, it's sufficient that he focus his heart opposite the Holy of Holies. In his heart, he visualizes that he's before the Holy of Holies. Similarly, Aya mahalach b'sfina or ba'asta yechaven divo keneged beit kodesh hakodashim. If somebody is traveling in a ship or in an asta and is unable to turn his face to the direction of Jerusalem, he should focus his heart opposite the Holy of Holies. Now, what is an asta? It's a raft, and one of the things I like about this Gemara is those pictures. Everybody likes pictures, right? You want to know what an asta is? I don't know how good it's coming out in my camera, but that's an asta. One of those reed rafts. So, if you're in a boat or a raft and you can't face Jerusalem, you focus your heart on the house of the Holy of Holies, on the inner sanctum of the temple. The Gemara says, Hane Shmona Esrei keneged mi. Since the Mishnah deals with the fundamental obligation to recite the Amida prayer, the Gemara seeks to resolve fundamental problems pertaining to this prayer. Corresponding to what were these 18 blessings instituted? Rabbi Steinsaltz notes, the Gemara was impelled to search for a source for the 18 blessings, as it is elsewhere, the Gemara elsewhere condemned excessive praises of God. it's interesting enough, the Gemara condemned going on at great lengths praising God. Therefore, it cites an allusion to show that there's a solid foundation for this practice of the 18 benediction. It's like not too much, not too little. The right amount of prayer. That's the interpretation of the Pnei Yeshua. The Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi, adds, these blessings correspond to the 18 times that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are mentioned in a single verse. I mean, when they're all together mentioned in a verse, there are apparently 18 psukim in the Torah that mention Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob together. And the 18 mitzvot commanded in the construction of the sanctuary. We also have 18 mitzvahs to make the sanctuary, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. So, when you're davening, when you're praying, it's like you're making your own temple, you're making your own tabernacle. It's like you're going into God's temple when you pray. In our many sins, we don't have a temple. May it be rebuilt speedily in our days. We all do enough mitzvot and learn enough Torah and do enough good deeds that God will have no recourse but to send us the ability to build the temple. Us and Him together. And until then, we have prayer. And once our prayer is pure enough, once we're ready, the temple will be there. Not that we don't have to do anything, we have to do everything possible to make it happen. That's getting a little aside there. So this is all about prayer. Prayer is a temple. So why 18 blessings? 18 commandments in the construction of the sanctuary. Amar Hillel, Brei Rabbi Shmuel, Mar Nachmani, Keneged Shmona Esrei, Azkarot Shenamar David, Behavu L'Shem B'nei Elim. Rabbi Hillel, son of Rabbi Shmuel, Bar Nachmani, said that the 18 mentions, the 18 benedictions correspond to the 18 mentions of God's name that King David said in Psalm 29. Give unto the Lord, O ye sons of might. Havu L'Shem B'nei Elim. Rabbi Yosef Amar Keneged Shmona Esrei Azkarot Sheb'Kriyat Shema. Rabbi Yosef said that the prayer corresponds to the 18 mentions of God's name in the Shema. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Keneged Shmona Esrei Chuliot Sheb'Shidra. Rabbi Tanchum said that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said that the prayer corresponds to the 18 vertebrae in the spine beneath the ribs. There are more than 18 vertebrae in the spine, so it's talking about the ones beneath the ribs. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Hamid Perel Tzarik Sheyichra Ad Sheyitpakaku Kol Chuliot Shebeshidra. Since Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's opinion basically made a prayer on the spinal vertebrae, the Gemara cites another statement of his that connects the two. Rabbi Tanchum said that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, in those blessings where one is required to bow, one who prays must bow until all of the vertebrae in the spine protrude. Halacha l'maaseh. Practical halacha, in those blessings of the meter prayer which one is required to bow, he must do so until the vertebrae in the spine protrude. He should not bend so low that his head is level with his belt, as that appears arrogant. So you don't make this big deal and bring your head below your belt. One who is sick or elderly may lower his head in a manner that makes it obvious that he wishes to bow. And everybody should understand that this person can't actually bow his spine, but he can only bow his head. Just while we're on the subject of bowing, Berakhot, when are we required to bow in the prayer? We bow during the prayer in the first blessing and in the second to last blessing. Baruch Atah Hashem. Right? According to the Arizal, Baruch, you bow your head. Atah, you bow your back. And then Hashem, you raise up both your back and your head. Because it says elsewhere in the Gemara, Kol HaKoreh Koreh B'Baruch, V'Kol Zokef B'Shem. Everybody who bows down at the word Baruch, and when you raise yourself up at the name of God, Hashem. So this happens 4 times in the Amidah prayer, in the first blessing, and in Modim Enachnu Lach, Shatau Hashem, and then at Hashem you raise up. Now it doesn't say Baruch or Atah in Modim, so you have to just, when you say Modim, you bow your back and your head. Perhaps first your head and then your back, according to the teachings of the Arizal. and then you raise up both your back and your head at God's name. So the Kamarna Rebbe, the Heichal Bracha, who was a great posek, the Modai HaMukubal, he has a very interesting. He notes that he looked through the entire Shulchan Aruch, and I checked it too. And he said there's nowhere in the Shulchan Aruch that it says to bow at Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu, just before the first, after the Psukei de Zimra, and then just before the first blessing of Yotzer Or, before the Shema Yisrael, or Baruch Hu in Mariv, before Mariv Haravim. We say Baruch Hu Hashem Hamvarach, and usually the Kamarna Rebbe says it's a complete mistake, because there's a ritual way of bowing for the Chazan in the Kaddish. The Chazanim or Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah scholars who lead the services, they know how to bow during the Kaddish. Like there's certain places you bow and there's certain places you come up. It's all spelled out in the Shulchan Aruch. So he thinks that but it doesn't say anywhere to bow at Baruch Hu in the entire code of Jewish law, except the Kolbo. The Kolbo is not the Yosef Karo. It's one of the books on the Halacha. It's a book of Halacha, and that's the only source about bowing during Baruch Hu. And he said, the Kamarna Rebbe says it's ridiculous. It says that it's very clear in the Gemara, if you bow down at Baruch and you come up at Hashem. So you find people going Baruch Hu et Hashem Hamvorach, and they're actually bowing down at God's name when they're supposed to be coming up at God's name. So this is perplexing, and the Kamarna Rebbe says it's probably because they saw the Chazan who was doing the bow when he said Baruch Hu. He was actually still bowing from the ritual bow in the Kaddish, at the last blessing in the Kaddish. So according to Halacha L'Maaseh, you do not have to bow at Baruch Hu. Unless you could. You see, everybody bows. It has become an accepted custom that's not anywhere in the Shulchan Aruch. The custom of the Lubavitcher Rebbe was to Baruch Hu et Hashem Hamvorach. When he just his head in the custom it's written in the Chabad Siddur that Baruch Hu et Hashem Hamvorach. The Lubavitcher Rebbe would just bow his head before Baruch Hu, and then at God's name Hashem he'd raise his head back up. So back to bowing in the prayer. We already exhausted that issue. Let's go on. Hanit manisare shasre havan. So why do the Gemara asks? 18 benedictions. There are 19. Amru Rabbi Levi birkat minim b'yavne tiknua keneged mi tiknua. Rabbi Levi says that the blessing against the heretics was established at Yavne. Corresponding to what was the 19? There was a special blessing against epikorsim, against the tzedukim, those who did not believe in the interpretation of Chazal, the Sadducees. They had their own interpretation of the Torah, but they claimed that they were just using the written Torah, and they were not respectful at all of the oral Torah. So they were making so many problems for the holy sages of the Talmud that they actually instituted a special blessing for these heretics. Now, blessing also means curse, so it's double language. Opposite speak, lashon sagi nahor. So the 19th one has to do with. So it's the question that Gemara asks, "Keneged mi tiknua?" Corresponding to what was the 19th blessing instituted. Amar Rabbi Levi Rabbi Hillel Bereda Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani Keneged al El Hakavod Hirum. We know that there's a blessing for the minim, heretics, but the question is, if there's 18 mentionings of God's name in Havel Hashem B'nei Elim in Psalm 29, God's name is mentioned 18 times, so where's the 19th? It says El Hakavod Hirim, the God of glory thunders, in the 3rd verse. It uses God's name El, and that's corresponding to the 19th. The Rav Yosef keneged echad sheb'Kriyat Shema. According to Rav Yosef, who said that the 18 benedictions correspond to the 18 mentions of God's name in the Kriyat Shema, then the 19th of the Berakhot Minim corresponds to echad in Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The Rabbi Tanchum Amar Rabbi Yishu ben Levi keneged chulia ktana shebeshudra. According to Rabbi Tanchum, who bases the 18 big benedictions on the 18 vertebrae in the spinal column below the ribs, he says it's perhaps the coccyx, the tailbone, the smallest bone in the spinal column, which would make it 19. Tanu Rabbanan Shimon Hapukuli Hisdir Shmona Esrei Berakhot Lifnei Rabban Gamliel Ad Al Seder B'Yavne Amar Lehem Rabban Gamliel LaChachamim Klum Yesh Lehem Sheyodei Letaken Birkat Aminim Amad Shmuel HaKatan V'Tikna. Sages taught that Shmuel Hapukuli arranged the 18 benedictions. What does it mean arranged? I mean, perhaps he was the author of them. He was the editor of them, perhaps. The Rabbi Steinsaltz notes, although the members of the Great Assembly instituted the Anshe Knesset Gedola instituted the formulas of the individual blessings, each individual recited only those blessings relevant to him. That's from the Talmudei Rabbeinu Yonah. According to the Chefetz Hashem, alternatively, perhaps there was no definite order to the blessings, and Shimon Bukuli came and he established them in a certain order. They were already written, but they were arranged in the right order by Shimon Bukuli. The Alfei Zuta says, arranged in order indicates that one who failed to recite the Amidah in that order does not even fill his obligation. They must be recited in the order that were established at Yavne by Rabbi Shimon, that Shimon HaBukuli arranged. The Shana Cheret Shachacha. So, go back. Amar lahem Rabban Gamliel LeChachamim Klum Yesh Lechem Sheyodei Letaken Berakhot Aminim. So, Shimon HaBukuli arranged 18 benedictions that were already in existence from the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, and they said them in the prayer at Yavne before Rabban Gamliel. Due to prevailing circumstances, there was a need to institute a new blessing directed against the heretics. So Rabbi Gamliel said, is anybody who knows how to institute a blessing of the heretics? And who can do this? Who wants the job? Shmuel HaKatan was one of the most pious men of the generation, stood and instituted it. Who was Shmuel HaKatan? Let's say he was very known for his humility. He was a tremendous anav. And if only somebody with such a level of humility could write such a blessing. The Gemara relates that a heavenly voice emerged and proclaimed that he was among those worthy of Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, even though the rest of his generation was not worthy of it. And the Gemara also says that Shmuel HaKatan uttered prophecies at the time of his death. So Shmuel HaKatan, he instituted the 19th blessing of the Sadducees. The Shana Acheret Shachacha, the next year when Shmuel HaKatan was the prayer leader, he forgot the blessing. He scrutinized it in an attempt to remember. He was thinking for 3 hours to try to remember remember the blessing, and they didn't remove him from being the prayer leader. Though for 3 hours he was standing there, and they all just waited. They knew that we had to respect Shmuel HaKatan. Even if it's going to take him time, he's interceding on behalf of the congregation before God, and they respected that for even 3 hours. Can you imagine a minyan today if someone stood there for 3 hours silently? Perhaps Rav Kook in Tveria, or the Amshin of a Rebbe. He doesn't lead the service, the Amshin of a Rebbe, but still, one of the great daveners of our generation, the great holy men of our generation. But in a regular minyan, you can imagine that your average Joe Shmuel Chazan stops for 3 hours. No, it's not going to happen. But it's very Shmuel HaKatan. For him, they'd wait. Amai lo heluhu. Why didn't they remove him? Why didn't they say, put another prayer leader up? V'hamar Rav Yehuda Marav ta'a b'kol Berakhot kulan ein malin oto b'Berakhot Aminim malin oto chayshina and shema minhu. Rav said one serving as the tzibur, the prayer leader, and he errs in reciting any of the blessings, you don't find another chazan. If he makes a mistake, you don't pull him down and say, "Oh, you made a mistake." Find the chazan who knows how to say the right words. No. But if he makes a mistake in the blessing of the heretics, shover ovim umachni azidim, then they remove him because you suspect he made a mistake in it. Perhaps he himself is secretly a heretic, and he intentionally omitted the blessing to avoid cursing himself. So why didn't they remove Shmuel HaKatan? Shiny Shmuel HaKatan the Ihu Tikna. It's different with Shmuel HaKatan because he actually wrote the blessing. So if he wrote the blessing himself, they knew he believed it. That's one reason. V'nechush Dilma Hadarbe says maybe suspect that he reconsidered it. Maybe God forbid, he was a tzaddik, and God forbid the tzaddik had become a non-tzaddik, a rasha. Gemiri Tava La Have Bisha. Abaye says that which is good does not transform into that which is evil. If he grew up good, if he was from his beginning, from his outset, he was a tzaddik, we don't suspect that he's becoming a rasha. If he grew up in bars, then perhaps, and then he becomes a big tzaddik with payas down to the floor, then he might cuts off his payas. You might suspect that he's going back to the bar. Then you might suspect it. Below, v'iktiv b'shuv tzadik mitzidkato v'asa avel. We have a verse, a specific verse in Ezekiel 18. It says, "And when the righteous one returns from his righteousness and does wicked, like all of the abominations of the wicked that the wicked has done, will he live? And all of the righteous deeds that he has done will not be remembered, given the treachery that he has carried out, and in his sin that he has transgressed. For these he shall die." And I think that if any of you saw. Not that any of you watch television, and God forbid any of you should see movies, but I heard there's this movie called, Quentin Tarantino's the director of, John Travolta, there's the black guy, the great actor, and before he's executing somebody, he'd always say, "And when the righteous one returns from his righteousness and does wicked like all the abominations that the wicked one does, etc., in his sin he has transgressed, for these he shall die." In Ezekiel 18 verse 24. So the Bible even reaches Hollywood. How about that? Anyhow, Abaye responded, "Ahu Rasha Meikaro, about Tzaddik Meikaro, lo." He said, like I said before, that I was preempting. I mean, I'd seen it before, so I was preempting from what I'd read before. That verse refers to a righteous individual who is initially wicked and repented, but ultimately returned to his evil ways. However, one who is initially righteous does not become wicked. V'lo v'hatanan al tamin b'atzmecha ad yom motcha sharei Yochanan Koren gadol shimesh b'kuhuna gadola 80 shana levasof nasa tzeduki. The Gemara refutes this. He says, wait a second, I have a question on this. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah? Don't be sure of yourself until the day you die. Don't be sure of yourself until the day you die, because Yochanan the high priest served as the high priesthood for 80 years and eventually became a Sadducee, became a heretic. Even one who is outstanding in his righteousness could even become a heretic. God forbid, the biggest Rosh Hashiva shouldn't trust himself. Even the biggest Rosh Hashiva could become a heretic. God forbid it should happen. So there's a different version of this in the Midrash. In the Orchot Chaim of Rabbi Eliezer Gadol, it says, "Al tamin ba'atzmecha ad yom mutcha hilchata karabanan hilchata." Al tamin ba'atzmecha ad yom mutcha hilchasa karabanan hilchas. Don't believe in yourself until the day you die, and the law of the rabbis is the law. The halacha of the rabbanan is the law. So, what does that mean? The Yerushalmi brings a story that there was a very righteous man who had his own version. He understood it differently than the rabbis. He said, "Don't believe yourself until you get old. Ad yom ziknatcha. Al tamin becha atzmecha ad ziknatcha." Since, as if to say, all of a sudden you don't have any taivas like you used to have. Your desire has waned. You're an old man. You don't have the desire and the potential for sin that you did when you were younger. So it's easier, and at that time you don't have to worry so much, and you don't have to guard yourself so much from sin when you're older. That's how he learned it. Now, he did not use the majority view that it's don't believe in yourself until the day you die. Rely on yourself, that is. So what happened to this righteous man with his own version? He was walking down the street and there was this very enticing woman, and she said, "Hey baby, you want a date?" And one thing led to another, and he did nevera with her. He was a yeshiva guy. He was a scholar, and he was relying on himself, and he got sucked into a nevera with a loose woman. Afterwards, he felt horrible. He was crushed. He had the feeling that his whole religious life had been a joke, had been a lie. All of a sudden, she turned around to him, and she wasn't a woman at all. She was a spirit. She was a ghost. This is all in the Yerushalmi. The ghost and the woman, ghost in the form of a woman, said to the scholar, "Don't worry, I'm just a ghost." But hilchata karabanan hilchata, you should accept the majority view of the way the version goes. As we have in the Gemara here, Al tamin ba'atzmecha ad yom motcha. That don't believe it, rely on yourself until the day you die. So Rabbi Eliezer said, the student said, so does that means that you never know which day you're going to die. So every day is the day before the day you might die. So we know a person has to make tshuva before he dies. So if you don't know which day it is, the day before you have to make tshuva. So for all intents and purposes, every day we have to make tshuva. Rabbi Eliezer said precisely. That's exactly the point. We don't know, so we have to make tshuva now. We can't put up tshuva until we're older. We only have right now. You never know what tomorrow is going to bring, so you have to seize the day and seize the Torah today. Shahari Yochanan Gadol, even the great high priest Yochanan Kohen Gadol became a heretic. So everybody has to be careful, from the smallest to the greatest. Amar Abaye, hu Yanai, hu Yochanan. Abaye responded, he is Yanai, he is Yochanan. In other words, from its inception, the entire Hasmonean dynasty had the same positive attitude towards the Sadducees. The Chashmonayim, they liked the Tzedukim. And there was no distinction between Yochanan Hyrcanus and Alexander Yanai. Yochanan the high priest had Sadducee leanings from the outset, according to this opinion, according to Abaye. Rava said, Rava Amar, Yanai l'chud v'Yochanan l'chud. Rava said, Yanai is distinct and Yochanan distinct. They did not share the same position in this regard. Yanai Rasha mikaro, v'Yochanan tzadik mikaro. Yanai was wicked from the outset, and Yochanan was righteous from the outset. Hanicha l'Abaye ela l'Rava kasha. If so, it works out well according to Abaye's opinion. However, according to Rava's opinion, it is indeed difficult. In other words, according to Rava, how could Yochanan, a righteous individual, have changed and turned wicked? Amar lach Rava tzadik me'ekaronami dilma hadarbe ihachi amaylo asku. The Gemara says Rava could have said to you, also somebody who's initially a tzaddik from the beginning, dilma hadarbe, perhaps he could also turn and change. And Ihachi amaylo asku. If so, why did they not remove Shmuel HaKatan for some of his prayer leader? Because he also could have faltered, changed. Shiny Shmuel HaKatan da'atchel be. It's different with Shmuel HaKatan as he began reciting the blessing of the heretics. And in other words, he was standing up there, he started Alaminim al tikva, and then he got flustered. In the middle of the blessing, he already started saying the blessing, so it wasn't. Everybody understood. He just got flustered for some reason, but he hadn't. He hadn't done any personal heretical leanings. Damar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Vayetem Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, because Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, and some say Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, Lo shanu ele shelo hitchil ba, aval hitchil ba gomra. The only if somebody is a shlich tzibur, and he says the 18 benedictions, and he doesn't even start the al amal shnim al tikva. He doesn't even start the blessing for the heretics. Then you suspect that he himself might be a heretic because he doesn't want to curse himself. But if he had already started and got flustered, you think perhaps everybody has to inspect their hearts and say, is there any doubts among the congregation? Are there any people who don't believe any of the Torah of the Talmud is true? Are there any people who have doubts about God? This is the world of doubts. This world is mostly darkness with only a little bit of light, so it's only natural. It's only natural that people will have doubts. But we have to overcome these doubts. We have to strengthen our faith. So, just like the great sage who said he knows his prayer is answered. If he prays a fluent prayer, and he knows his prayer won't be answered if he doesn't pray a fluent prayer. So if Shmuel HaKatan, who was a tzaddik, couldn't pray a fluent prayer and he had to wait for 3 hours until he could finish it, there must have been a great force of darkness in the world among the Jewish community at that time that could not be pushed away by the power of belief and the power of the righteousness of the sages. Hani Sheva de Shabta Keneged Mi. On what do we base the 7 blessings in Shabbat? Amar Rabbi Chalafta ben Shmuel Keneged Shiva Kolot Amar David Alamayim. The 7 blessings in Shabbat, according to Rabbi Chalafta ben Shaul, corresponds to the 7 words times Kol is mentioned in Psalm 29. Kol Hashem Alamayim, the voice of God on the waters, etc. It says the word voice, Kol, 7 times. Hani Tesha the Rosh Hashanah Keneged Mi Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Kartigin Yitzchak Demin Kartiginin Keneged Tisha Azkarot She'amra Chana B'Tfilata Da'amar Mar B'Rosh Hashanah Nifkeda Sarah Rachel V'Chana. The Gemara says, corresponding to what are the 9 blessings of Rosh Hashanah? Musaf prayer added. In Musaf and Rosh Hashanah we have 9 blessings. So Rabbi Yitzchak of Kartiginin, I don't know where that is. Perhaps it's Carthage, perhaps not. Rabbi Yitzchak of Kartiginin said they correspond to the 9 mentions of God's name that Chana said in a prayer in 1 Samuel chapter 2. The connection between Chana's prayer and Rosh Hashanah is based on what the Amar B'Rosh Hashanah Nifked Sarah Rachel V'Chana, that the Master said that on Rosh Hashanah Sarah, Rachel, and Chana all conceived their sons. The divine decree that they would conceive their sons was issued on Rosh Hashanah, and then that year they had children. Hani Esrim Va'arba D'Ta'anita Keneged Mi. The Gemara continues, corresponding to what were the 24 blessings of the Amida prayer of the fast day instituted. On the fast days, there's 24 blessings. Amar Rabbi Chelbo Keneged Esrim Va'arba Rananot She'amar Shlomo Melech She'Ichnis Aron Lebeit HaKodesh HaKodeshim Ihachi Kol Yom Enami Nemrinu. Rabbi Chelba said they correspond to 24 songs that Solomon said when he brought the ark into the Holy of Holies. You can see that in 1 Kings chapter 8. Iachi Kol Yoma Nami Nemrinhu. If so, we should say 24 blessings every day. Because that's like the prayer is like the temple. So it's like the inauguration of the temple whenever you stand up to pray. Kol Yoma Nami Nemru V'Re'emat Amrinhu Shlomo B'Yoma Derachme Ananame B'Yoma Derachme Amar Lahu. The Gemara says, when did Solomon say them? On a day of supplication for mercy. We too also, it was a day of supplication for mercy when Solomon inaugurated the temple. It was a special day. So we too, on fast days, which are days of supplication for God's mercy for the world, we're fasting to make tshuva for the whole world and for God to be merciful with us. So then it's like the inauguration of the temple. It's a special day of supplication. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Me'en Shmona Esrei. We learn in the Mishnah Rabbi Yeshua said that each day one recites an abridged form of the 18 benedictions. Mai me'en shmona esrei. What is this abridged form? Rav Amar me'en kol bracha bracha. Rav said it's an abridged form of each and every blessing. Shmuel said, Havinenu Hashem Eloheinu l'dat derakecha, modat avavenu liratecha, v'tislach lanu liot gulim, v'rachakenu mi machovenu v'darshenu binot artzecha, v'nefutzatenu v'arba tekabetz, v'hatoim al datcha yishafetu, v'al harosheim tanif yadecha, v'yismuchu tzadikim b'vinyan yirecha, u'v'tikun hecha lecha, u'v'tzmichas Koren David abdecha, u'v'arichad ner levenishai mishichecha, terem nikra ata ta'aneh, baruch ata Hashem shomei tefillah. The Havinenu prayer, according to Shmuel, goes like this. Grant us understanding, Lord our God, to know your ways and sensitize our hearts so that we may revere you, and forgive us so that we may be redeemed, and keep us far from our suffering, and satisfy us with the pastures of your lands, and gather our scattered people from the four corners of the earth, and those who go astray shall be judged according to your will, and raise your hand against the wicked, and may the righteous rejoice in the rebuilding of your city, and the restoration of your sanctuary, and in the flourishing of your servant David, and establishing a light for your Messiah, son of Yishai. Before we call, may you answer. Blessed are you who here listens to prayer. Although Shmuel said to pray the abridged prayer, Abaya would curse anyone who said that prayer. Grant Havinenu, as he held that one may recite it only in exigent circumstances. According to Rabbeinu Hananel and the Meiri, the Havinenu, Abaya held that you can only say Havinenu if you absolutely have to pray very fast. If you're in an emergency situation, or in a dangerous situation, and you're in a war, and they're in the foxhole there, and you need to pray, and you just happen to have a few minutes between shellings, and you happen to have in your head, or you have your little sitter, you can say the short version. Otherwise, you say the long version. You said curse. Now, okay, it didn't really mean curse. It doesn't mean like witches and warlocks and curses and all that nonsense. When Abaya says layet Allah, he would curse anyone, it doesn't mean like that. It means that Abaya disapproved of this custom and would harshly criticize those who followed it. And this is the meaning of layet, curse, throughout the whole Talmud. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel Kol Hashana Kula Mitpilal Adam Havinenu. Rav Nachman said that Shmuel said one may say, he didn't agree with Abaya at all. He said all year you can say Havinenu, the abridged prayer. But there are two times you can't. Chutz mi Motzi Shabbos and Motzi Yamim Tovim Mipnei shetzarich lomar Havdalah b'chonen adat. Motzi Shabbos, the night after Shabbos, you have Mariv. And then, at the conclusion of Shabbat and the conclusion of festivals, you have to say the distinction, the Havdalah, who separates between the sacred and the profane, etc. And that we put that in the fourth blessing, Chonen Hadat, who graciously grants knowledge. Because only in the blessing for knowledge, you can only making a distinction between the sacred and the profane, between Israel and other nations. It's a key component of knowledge. If you don't have knowledge, you can't make distinctions like that. Matkif la Rabbi Bar Shmuel, like John Lennon, he was a good musician, but imagine all those people and there's no difference between anything else and we're all one. It's clearly he didn't have any knowledge because he couldn't make a distinction. But he writes beautiful songs, but I don't really care for the words so much, except for perhaps some sort of literary creativity. But I don't certainly not not Torah from Sinai, to say the least. Matkif la Rabbi Bar Shmuel v'nemra beracha revi'it mipnei atzma. Rabbi Bar Shmuel strongly objects to this. He says, let us say Havdalah is an independent fourth blessing, and then we can say So you can say the abridged Havinenu prayer, and you can add in another blessing. Milotanan Rabbi Akiva Omer Amra Bracha Revi'it Bifnei Atzma Rabbi Eliezer Omer B'Hoda'ah. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah that Rabbi Akiva said, he says Havdalah is an independent fourth blessing? In the old days they had a special bracha for Havdalah during the Amida, not to put in the fourth blessing, Chonen Adat. He says, Rabbi Eliezer says he should say Havdalah in the blessing of Thanksgiving, Modim Nachnulach, in the second to last one. Atu kol hashana kule mi avdinan k'Rabbi Akiva v'hashta nami navid. The Gemara responds, do we practice in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva throughout the entire year regarding this issue? That we will also practice this way now? Kol hashana kula my tama lo avdinan k'Rabbi Akiva. Throughout the whole year, why don't we do it like Rabbi Akiva? Tmani sari takun, chasre lo takun. Because they instituted 18 blessings, they did not institute 19 blessings. Hachanami shvat takun, tmani lo takun. Here too, they instituted 7, they didn't institute 8. Therefore, the possibility to recite Havdalah as an independent fourth blessing is rejected. It has to add up to 7, not 8. If you do Havinenu, you have only 7 blessings. You have the 3 in the beginning, you have Havinenu in the middle, and you have the 3 at the end. So if you have one more, can't do it. Matkif la Rab Marzutra v'nichla miklal Havinenu Hashem Elokeinu hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol kasha. Marzutra strongly objects to this. Let us include Havdalah in the framework of the abridged blessing. Grant us understanding, Lord our God, who distinguishes between sacred and profane. No response was offered to this objection, and it remains difficult. Amar Rabbi Bevi bar Abaye Kol hashana kula mitpalo adam havinenu chutz miyamot geshamim. Rabbi Bevi bar Abaye said there is an additional restriction that applies to the abridged prayer. One may recite grant us understanding havinenu throughout the entire year, except during the rainy season. Because in the rainy season he has to recite the request for rain in the blessing of the year. Matkif la Marzutra. Marzutra strongly objects to this. Marzutra says, let us include the request for the rain in the framework of the abridged blessing, and satisfy us with the pastures of the land, and grant dew and rain. Ate liitrude. Ihachi Havdalah b'chonen adat nami ate liitrude. The Gemara says this is unfeasible, as he will become confused by introducing a new element to the standard formula of the blessing. The Gemara asks, if so, by introducing Havdalah in the framework of the abridged blessing, in the section alluding to the blessing, who graciously grants knowledge, he will also become confused. Why did the Gemara fail to respond to Marzutra's strong objection with regard to the Havdalah in this manner? Amre hatam kevan da'atya b'tchilat tzlota lo mitrid. Hacha kevan da'atya be'emtzat tzlota matrid. The Gemara answers. They say, the cases are different. There, regarding Havdalah, since the introduction of the new element comes at the beginning of the prayer, he will not become confused. Here, since the request for rain comes in the middle of the prayer, he will become confused. Matkif la Ravashi. Ravashi strongly objects to this. V'nemra b'shomei tefillah. Let us say the request for rain in the framework of the abridged blessing, in the section alluding to the blessing who listens to prayer. We can say it there. The Shomei Tefillah. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Ravasi, Ta v'lo hizkir b'vor kashmim b'tchiyat hametim, machazrin oto, shela b'brichot hashanim, ein machazrin oto. Rabbi Tanchum said that Rav Asi said, one who erred and did not mention the might of the rains and the blessing on the revival of the dead. There's a special blessing, Tchiyat Metim, and that's where we say the Gvur Tishamim, about the might of the rains. If you forgot to say it in Tchiyat Metim and Amachayim Metim, in that blessing, we require him to return the beginning of the prayer and repeat it. However, one who erred and failed to recite the request for rain in the 9th blessing of the Midah, the blessing for years, the Berach Hashanim, we don't require him to return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it. because he can recite it in the blessing Shomei Tefillah, who listens to prayer. And one who erred and failed to recite Havdalah in the blessing Chonen Adam Da'at, to graciously grants knowledge, we do not require him to return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it, as he can recite it in the Havdalah over wine after he finishes up Ma'ariv. Like we said a few daf ago. One can ask for rain in the... let's keep going. V'havdalah b'chonen Da'at ve'en machzirin oto mipnei sheyachol amra lakos ta'a shayni. The Gemara says, if you made a mistake, it's different. And only then does he have the option to ask for rain and the blessing for who listens to prayer. Ab initio, the request for rain may not be inserted there. Ab initio, there's l'chatchila. The outside, you can't just throw in the blessing for rain in Shomei Tefillah. It's supposed to be for Shamim, ab initio. Gufa Amar Rav Tanchum Maravasi. The statement that Rabbi Tanchum said that Rav Asi said was incidental to the previous discussion. The Gemara attempts to understand the matter itself. Rabbi Tanchum said that Rav Asi said, Ta'a v'lo hiskir gvor kshamim b'tchit hametim machzirin oto she'ela b'berchat hashanim ein machzirin oto. One who erred and did not mention the might of the rains and the blessing of the revival of the dead, we require him to return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it. However, one who erred and failed to recite the request for rain and the blessing of the years, we do not require him to return to the beginning of the blessing and repeat it, because we can recite it in the blessing Shomei Tefillah, who hears prayer. V'havdalah b'chonen adat ein machzir oto mipnei sheyachol lo'omra al hakos. And if you didn't say Havdalah in the prayer in the Chonen Adat, in the fourth blessing, then we don't make him go back, because he can say Havdalah over the cup of wine after the prayer. Meisi ve'ta'a v'lo hiskir gevur gshamim b'tchiyat hametim machzirin oto. She'ela b'berchat hashanim machzirin oto. V'havdalah b'chonen adat ein machzirin oto. Mipnei sheyachol la'omra al hakos. The Gemara raises an objection based on what was taught in the Tosefta. One who erred and did not mention the might of the rains and the blessing of the revival of the dead, we tell him to return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it. One who erred and failed to recite the request for rain in Berakhot and Mavarech Hashanim, he didn't say 10 Talamatar, Livracha, he just said 10 Bracha, he didn't mention rain. Then we require him to return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it. However, one who erred and didn't say Havdalah in the blessing Chonen Adat, we don't make him go to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it, because he can say it over the Havdalah cup. Like we said 3 times already. Lo kasha, ha b'yachid, ha b'tzibor. The Gemara responds, it's not a difficulty. No, wait a second. The Tosefta we just read contradicts the statement of Rabbi Tanchum with regard to the one who erred and failed to recite the request for rain and the blessing of the years. In the previous Tosefta, it says, Rabbi Tanchum said, She'ela, if you forgot to say She'ela b'berchat hashanim, ein machzirin oto. If you didn't pray for rain in the blessing of the years, we don't make him start at the beginning of the prayer again. And then the next section said She'ela b'berchat hashanim machzirin oto. If you didn't pray for rain in Mavarech Hashanim and the blessing for the years, we do make him start again. So the first one says we don't, the second says we do. How do we resolve the contradiction? The Gemara says, Lo kasha, ha b'yachid, ha b'tzibor. This case where we require him to return to the beginning of the Amidah and repeat it refers to a situation where he's praying as an individual. While that case where we do not require him to return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it, refers to a situation where he is praying as part of a congregation. But Tzibor, my time alone, the Gemara raises a difficulty. When praying as a part of a congregation, what is the reason that he need not return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it? If he's praying as a tzibor, why doesn't he have to go back and say the Amidah again? The reason is Mishum Deshamash B'Shliach Tzibor, because he hears it and he says Amen to the Shliach Tzibor. The Shliach Tzibor, the prayer leader, takes care of everybody when he repeats the prayer, the Amidah. Ihachi in the Chazarat Hashatz. Ihachi hai mipnei sheyachol la'omra b'shomei tefillah mipnei sheshomei shliach tzibor mibayalei. Ihachi hai mipnei sheyachol la'omra b'shomei tefillah. How could you say that? Mipnei sheshomei mishliach tzibor mibayalei. So that means when praying, there's a difficulty. We have to resolve this difficulty. The difficulty is this: when praying as a part of a congregation, what is the reason that he need not return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it? Because he can fulfill his obligation when he hears it from the Shliach Tzibor, the prayer leader, in the Chazarat Hashatz, the repetition of the Amidah prayer. If so, Rabbi Tarchum's formulations is imprecise. That which he said that he need not return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it, because he can recite it in the blessing who listens to prayer, Shomei Tefillah, it should have actually said, because he hears it from the Shliach Tzibor. This proves that the attempt to rebuff the challenge of the Tosefta to Rabbi Tanchum was incorrect. Ele idi ve'idi b'yachid. Rather, both this statement of Rabbi Tanchum and that statement in the Tosefta refer to one praying as an individual. They both are talking about you praying alone, or anyone praying alone, and it is nevertheless not difficult. V'lo kasha. Ha de'idkar kodem shomei tefillah. Idi v'yachid lo kasha. Ha de'idkar kodem shomei tefillah. This case, the case where we do not require him to return to the beginning of the prayer and repeat it, that's a case where it's still a yachid, but it's a case where the yachid, the individual praying alone, recalls his error before he reaches the blessing Shomei Tefillah, who listens to prayer, in which case he can ask for rain in that blessing. He hasn't said it, so if you haven't said Shomei Tefillah, you can always put in the request for rain in the Shomei Tefillah prayer. Before you say the end, Berakhot Hashem Shomei Tefillah, you're okay, you can say it. You got it covered. You got Amud Beit here, and we're going to sit through Amud Beit. Ha de'idkar batar Shomei Tefillah. This case, where we require him to return to the beginning of the prayer and to repeat the whole thing, refers to a situation where he recalls his error after he says Shomei Tefillah. Then it's different. He already said Berakhot Hashem Shomei Tefillah, that blessing in the middle of the Amidah, just before Ritzeh. Then that would be which number would that be? 18, 19 minus 3, 16. The 15th blessing, Shomei Tefillah. If you already said the 15th blessing, it's got to go back. Say it again. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Ta'avalo Hizkir Shel Rosh Chodesh Ba'avodah, Chozer Lavodah, Nizkar B'Hoda'ah, Chozer Lavodah, V'sim Shalom, Chozer Lavodah, V'im Siyam, Chozer L'Rosh. So on a similar note, Rabbi Tanchum said that Rav Asi said that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said one who erred and did not mention the new moon. And the addition, may there rise and come Yalev Yavo in the blessing of the temple service. In the 17th blessing in the Amidah prayer, Sena Hashem Elokenu. If you in there in Berakhot Hashem Machazir Shchinu Tol Tzion, if you didn't say Ya'alev V'Yavo before you said God's name, you already said God's name, then what does he do? If before he said God's name, he has to go back to Ritzeh, and you can say it from the beginning of the 17th blessing. You can go back to Ritzeh Na Hashem Elokenu. So too, if he remembers during Modim, he returns to the blessing of the temple service. Also, if he remembers in the blessings Sim Shalom, grant peace, he returns to the blessing of the temple service. Back to number 17. But if he remembers it after he completed the Amida prayer, he returns to the beginning of the prayer. Once you move, if the law is that if you move your feet, you start stepping back. I guess if you move 1 foot, some rabbis might say you got to move 2 feet. But if you moved your feet, however, you learn the law. Then, and you didn't say Ya'aleh v'yavo on the new moon, then you got to say the whole prayer over, but not in Mariv. At Mariv, we don't have to repeat Ya'aleh v'yavo. There's an interesting story about this. I'll say it very quickly. When the Baal Shem Tov revealed himself after 20 years in the Carpathians, and he became a somewhat public figure, the Beit Din of Brody came to interview him. They want to see, who is this man who thinks he's something? Look who thinks he's nothing, right? So they interviewed him, and they asked him a very simple question. So tell me, if you forget to say Ya'aleh v'yavo on Rosh Chodesh, what do? Do you go back to the beginning of the prayer? Or do you go back to Ritzeh? These patronizing questions that they ask children in 5th grade, kind of thing, in Israel. So the Baal Shem Tov looked at the judges and he said, you need to know this law. The truth is, even though I do know this law, I don't need to know this law, because I would never forget. I would never forget to say Ya'aleh v'yavo at the right place. But you, honorable judges, you would forget. So that's why you need to know the law. Now, I don't know where this story comes from, but I always thought it was an interesting story. Baal Shem Tov. Amar Papa Breder Berakhot Barada Ha'amrinan Siyam Chozel Rosh Lo Amran Ela She'akar Raglav Avalo Akar Raglav Chozel Avoda Amar Le Manalacha Amar Le Me Abba Mari Shamieli to Abba Mari Merav. Where do we derive this law? That you can go back to Ritzeh and say Ya'aleh v'yavo as long as you haven't moved your feet. Step backwards, during the Amida prayer. We've got to keep your feet in the same place. Once you move your feet, where do we derive this law? He said to us, when Papa, son of Rabbi Acha Barada, said the law, and he said to him, who said to who? Interesting, I can't see who says to who. But he said to him, from where do you derive this halacha? He said, I learned it from my father. My teacher told it to me. And my father, my teacher, heard it from Rav. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Hada amran akar raglav chozel rosh. Lo amran ele she'eno ragil omar tachnuni machar tfilato. Aval ragil omar tachnuni machar tfilato. Chozel avodah. Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak says that you say the Tachnunim after the Sim Shalom, Berakhot Yisrael b'Shalom, Yul Ratzon Imrei Fi V'Gimel L'Fnei Kadol Tzuraguli, and then you have Elohai Neshama Elohai Netzor L'Shon Imera, please guard my tongue from evil, my lips from speaking deceitfully, etc. There's extra supplications at the end of the Amida. If somebody is accustomed, Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak says, if somebody is accustomed to saying these extra supplications, then what? And all of a sudden he forgot to mention the new moon, Ya'aleh v'yavo, in his prayer. He need only return to Ritzeh. I guess that's, if he's still praying, according to Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, he may have even moved his feet, but if he's still davening and saying these extra supplications, he may only have to go back to Ritzeh. Ikadamre amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, hadamran gilo akar raglav choser lavodah lo amran elad sheragilo mar tachnuni machar tfilato, aval im eino ragilo mar tachnuni machar tfilato choser l'rosh. Some say Rav Nachman Yosef said that which we said, that if he did not yet move his feet, he need only return to the blessing of the temple service, was only said in the case where he is accustomed to reciting additional supplications after his prayer. However, if he is unaccustomed to reciting supplications after his prayer, he must return to the beginning of the prayer, and is considered as if he had already completed it. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kol ha'oseh tfilato keva. Rabbi Eliezer said, everybody who makes his prayer fixed. What does it mean? His prayer is not supplication. Kol ha'oseh tfilato keva ein tfilato tachanonim. What does this mean? He doesn't. His prayer is, if his prayer is fixed, his prayer is not supplication. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of fixed? Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said, the Rav Oshaya said, it means anyone for whom his prayer is like a burden upon him. It's fixed. It's like rote. He's just got to do it. It's a fixed annoyance for him, God forbid. He seeks to quickly unburden himself. It's like a burden for him. Anybody whose prayer is like a burden, like, oh, darn it, I got to daven, I really don't want to, The rabbi said this refers to anyone who does not recite the prayer in the language of supplication. But as a standardized representation without emotion. In other words, if you don't put your heart into it, if you don't put your heart and soul into the words and think about the words you're saying and know before whom you are standing and speaking, the King of all kings, your entire life is in his hands, everybody's life is in his hands, and everything you have you get from him, and he is the highest one of the heights, he is the creator of all of the worlds, he fills all of the worlds, he surrounds all of the worlds, and by his will all things exist, and if you meditate on this enough, then you are davening. But if you just move your lips because you know it by heart from your childhood or from your days in yeshiva, and you're just fulfilling your obligation, that's not davening. That's just fulfilling your obligation. But Rabbanan Amrei, Kol mi she'enu omra b'loshon tachnonim. That's like I just said. Rabba Barav Yosef Amrei Tarvayu. Both Rabba and Rav Yosef said, Kol she'enu yechol lechadesh davar. Anybody who can't think of anything new to daven for, every time you stand up to pray, think, how is my situation new? What's the new thing I can daven for? There's always something left to daven for. It's not just the same words over and over again. There's always something else in the world that you can stand before God and say, God, this needs to be fixed. If there's a tsunami on the other side of the world, you daven that God's creatures are not destroyed and God's peoples of the world are safe and that they all come to believe in the one God. And if there's still wicked people in the world, you turn that either God destroys them or perhaps you could daven that they become the best friends Israel ever had. There's always something to daven for. Rabbi Nachman says, you even daven for a shoelace. Okay, maybe not for a shoelace, but maybe, who am I? What do I know? Amar Rabbi Zera, Ana yachelna l'chodshe ba milta umistafina dilma matridna. Rabbi Zera said, I could introduce a novel element in every prayer, but I am afraid I'll become confused. Every word in the prayer instituted by the sages was so important to Rabbi Zera, he didn't want to distract himself from his connection to God through the repetition and the meditation on the words, the holy words of the Siddur. And with this we will pause for now. Shalom uvracha.